The importance of being heard. Voice, conscience, and the human need to speak. To be heard is not merely a social luxury, it is a psychological necessity, a moral recognition, a legal safeguard, a spiritual principle, and a societal foundation. Human beings do not simply exist biologically, they exist relationally. Identity itself forms in dialogue. A person becomes fully human not only by thinking or feeling, but by expressing and witnessing those thoughts and feelings reflected back by others. When a voice is acknowledged, existence is affirmed. When a voice is silenced, something deeper than speech is suppressed: agency, dignity, and meaning. The psychological need for voice. Psychology consistently shows that human identity develops through expression. From infancy, communication precedes language, crying, gestures, facial responses. A baby does not merely seek food or comfort, it seeks response. The developing brain learns a foundational lesson. My signals matter. When caregivers respond, neural pathways associated with safety, trust, and self-worth strengthen. This becomes the basis of secure attachment and later emotional regulation. Being heard performs several psychological functions. Validation of reality. Speaking and being acknowledged confirms that one's perceptions are real. Integration of experience. Narrating events allows the brain to organize emotion into meaning. Agency formation. Expression reinforces the belief that one can influence the world. Stress regulation. Verbalizing distress reduces physiological stress responses. Modern trauma research shows that unexpressed experience does not disappear. It remains somatically encoded in tension, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, or dissociation. Speech is therefore not simply communication. It is regulation of the nervous system. 2. What happens when a person is silenced? When someone is metaphorically or literally gagged across long periods, unable to warn, object, testify, or prevent harm they can foresee, profound psychological consequences emerge. 1. Learned helplessness. Repeated inability to affect outcomes teaches the brain that effort is futile. Even when opportunities later arise, initiative may not return. The psyche adapts by conserving energy through resignation. The internal narrative becomes, "Nothing I do changes anything." This is not weakness, it is adaptation to chronic powerlessness. 2. Moral injury. Distinct from trauma, moral injury occurs when a person is forced to act against conscience or prevented from acting in accordance with it. Knowing harm is coming yet being unable to intervene fractures the moral self. The individual may experience guilt without wrongdoing, shame without fault, grief without closure. The psyche struggles because moral identity depends on alignment between values and action. 3. Identity erosion. Voice is tied to selfhood. Persistent silencing gradually produces self-doubt. Maybe my perceptions are wrong. Internalized dismissal. My thoughts don't matter. Fragmentation of identity. Over time, a person may stop forming opinions publicly and eventually privately. Silence becomes internalized. 4. Chronic hypervigilance. If foreseeable harm repeatedly unfolds while warnings go unheard, the brain may remain in constant alertness. The individual becomes a witness trapped in anticipation, unable to discharge responsibility through action. This creates psychological exhaustion, responsibility without power. 3. Moral philosophy. Why listening is an ethical duty. Across moral traditions, listening is not passive, it is an ethical act. To hear another person is to recognize them as a moral equal. Philosophers from Aristotle to modern ethics scholars emphasize that moral communities depend on dialogue. Justice requires testimony, conscience requires audience. Silencing someone is morally significant because it denies participation in shared reality. When voices are excluded, errors go unchallenged. Harm becomes predictable. Responsibility becomes concentrated in fewer hands. Morally, societies fail not only when wrongdoing occurs, but when warnings are ignored. Listening distributes moral responsibility across the community. 4. Law, the right to be heard. Legal systems encode this principle formally. One of the most ancient foundations of justice is audi alteram partem, hear the other side. Courts recognize that fairness is impossible without voice because evidence emerges through testimony. Accountability requires speaking. Prevention depends on reporting risk. Whistleblower protections, witness rights, and freedom of expression exist precisely because societies learned, often painfully, that silenced individuals allow preventable harm to escalate. Law assumes something psychologically profound. Truth is collective, not solitary. No single perspective is sufficient. Justice requires many voices. Biblical and spiritual perspectives. Biblical narratives repeatedly center unheard voices. The prophets are figures who speak warnings others resist hearing. The Psalms are filled with cries seeking acknowledgement, hear my voice. Justice in Scripture is frequently tied to listening to the marginalized, widows, strangers, the poor. In biblical tradition, being heard is linked with divine recognition itself. Prayer is fundamentally an appeal to be heard, implying that listening is sacred behavior. Silencing truth-tellers is portrayed not merely as social failure but spiritual blindness. The recurring message is that communities are judged not only by what they do, but by whose voices they refuse to hear. 6. Societal function. Why everyone benefits from every voice. Complex societies survive through distributed perception. Each person occupies a unique vantage point. Information about danger, innovation, injustice, or opportunity exists in fragments across individuals. When people speak freely, risks are identified earlier. Creativity multiplies. Group intelligence increases. Empathy expands. Social psychologists call this collective intelligence. Groups perform better when participation is broad and psychologically safe. Silencing reduces societal awareness, much like removing sensors from a complex system. A society that discourages voice becomes blind to its own trajectory. 7. The inner consequence of lifelong gagging. A person prevented from preventing foreseeable harm carries a unique psychological burden. They become a witness without agency. Over time, several inner conflicts may develop. Responsibility versus powerlessness, feeling accountable for outcomes one could not influence. Truth versus survival, choosing silence to avoid punishment. Hope versus evidence, repeated disappointment eroding belief in change. Some individuals respond by withdrawal, others by intensified internal dialogue. Some develop heightened empathy because they understand unheard suffering intimately. Paradoxically, prolonged silencing can produce deep moral clarity but also profound loneliness. The psyche seeks resolution through one essential experience, finally being heard. 8. Listening as restoration. Healing does not necessarily require agreement. It requires acknowledgement. When someone's voice is genuinely received, the nervous system relaxes. Fragmented experiences integrate. Moral injury begins to repair. Agency reawakens. Being heard restores continuity between inner truth and outer world. Listening therefore becomes an act of repair, psychological, moral, and social. 9. Conclusion. Voice as shared survival. Human civilization advances not because some people speak, but because many do and others listen. To hear another person is to expand reality beyond oneself. To allow voice is to distribute wisdom, responsibility, and foresight across the whole community. A society where everyone's input matters is not idealistic, it is adaptive. It reduces harm before it occurs and strengthens collective resilience. Silence may preserve order temporarily, but listening preserves humanity. Because ultimately, being heard is not about winning arguments or asserting dominance. It is about recognition, the confirmation that one's awareness, conscience, and presence participate in the shared human story. And when every voice is allowed to contribute, everyone benefits not only from what is said, but from what is prevented, understood, and healed together.